Hi class, I want to talk to you about how to select your colors when you're doing an image that is going to be in a painting. And in this particular image, I'm analyzing it beforehand. I'm looking at the colors that are underlying in the feathers, what is the lightest lights, and also the temperatures of colors as well. So I go from my lightest lights to my darkest darks and think of cools and warms. And so then I take those colors and I pick them out of my set of Prismacolors in this case, or in my paints. I do the same thing. So I'm going to take this away now, and you can see where I have pre-selected the colors that I'm going to use. I have quite a few, so I have a lot more to select from. You could just do estimates of what you have in your particular set. So I've grouped the colors together where I've got my browns, then I put in a couple of yellows, a cool and a warm, and the violets, because I tend to use a lot of purple in my work. And I put in one red for highlights. I have my blues together, and the goldenrod colors that are in here, which could be with the yellows. The other thing I've picked out are the lights, and you'll find that that they're very helpful. And this particular one is called Eggshell. I bought that separately, and I found some of these colors to be really invaluable. And this is sand. So if you're at Blick and you've decided that you like working with colored pencil, you may want to pick out some of these extra light creamy colors. They work really well for all sorts of applications. And then of course you're going to need white, but it's not as much as you think because you use the white of the paper just like watercolor, but this is often used for blending. And occasionally black, and that comes with your set. Another color I like to use mainly in lieu of black is blue indigo, and it's a really fabulous color, and if it's blended with other colors, it gives you a richer black than black does. So then I take my colors, and after I've picked them out, I make a sample chart. And it gives me an idea of the color that is in the bird. And you can see the relationship here, how closely these colors are to what's going on in my subject. So I think that's an easier way to select your colors so you're not getting greens and other colors mixed up in this. Okay, next I'm going to work on the bird. Be right back. These are some of the accessories that I use when I'm doing a colored pencil drawing. And my erasers are a kneaded eraser, which you really need to soften up and move in your hands so it stretches and you can get a clean piece of eraser out. Other colors will get stuck in this and can blend into your paper as you're working, so be careful of that. This is for short stumps of leftover pencils, and this is a holder. You don't have to have this, but it's sure helpful, and it's made by the Kohinoor company, and so for your little nothings, leftovers, you could utilize them for a little bit longer. Sometimes I use a colorless blender, which is made by the Prismacolor company. I haven't found them invaluable or anything, but occasionally they come in helpful. And that colorless blender also comes in a pencil form, which I think is a little bit more convenient. Then I use my HB pencils, something pretty light, and of course a latex eraser. Lastly, I use my lint roller, which is really super helpful. Occasionally, I'll use one of these, they call them tortillons, and it's basically rolled up paper. And you could use them for blending occasionally. Kleenex and paper towel will do about the same thing for me. All right, next I want to talk about paper. I'm going to be working on an inexpensive paper because I'm just doing a sketch today. And this is about a 60-pound piece of Strathmore drawing paper. And it's okay. It's not the greatest. And then some of the better papers are thicker. And this particular book that I have is a heavyweight drawing paper, and it's a 130-pound paper. So you could hear that. And it has also a beautiful tooth on it. What we mean by the tooth is, if you looked at the paper as a cross section, it's the bumps and rivulets you get in the paper. So if you're looking at this, this might be considered a cold pressed paper. I'm not going to explain why it's called that, but it would be cold pressed. This smooth paper would be called hot pressed. Then they have some papers that are really valleyed, and that would be called a rough paper. Now these are cross sections. This really relates to watercolor, but it also relates to drawing paper. And then you'll hear terms like Bristol. Bristol will be a very hot pressed paper. So then the poundage of the paper, if you're looking at a typing paper, it could be 40 pounds, 30 pounds. But if you're looking at a drawing paper, you really want something in the 70-pound range. So just be aware that the thicker the paper, the more durable it'll be, and the better the paper. All right, let's get on to the demonstration. Hi class, I'm getting started with a demonstration of this small bird, and I've used the graphite transfer method. I'm now taking my lint roller and pulling off any extra unneeded graphite dust, and I'll be erasing as I go along, because you don't want to get graphite in the Prismacolor. It really will muddy up the color. So I'm going to get started. Just to tell you, I'm using a Panasonic pencil sharpener, and we'll get started on the side opposite my hand. So since I'm left-handed, I'll be starting on the right and moving across. If you don't do it that way, if you've done any drawing, it's possible you could smudge your drawing as you're working in your colors. I'm going to lighten up my drawing a little bit in this area using a kneaded eraser. It's enough for me to see. I want you to be able to see it as well. So I'll just do that side of the head. So it's there, but not very bold. I also have another photograph that I'm working from. And now I'm going to analyze the colors. First of all, looking at this bird, find out where your lightest lights are in this particular section. And I know that this area is pretty light. So I want to avoid it, just like you would do with watercolor. You want to leave the paper as your white. This area is pretty light. I'm going to lighten this up a little bit more. And now I'm going to go to my tray of Prismacolors and see what's in that area. Where do I want to begin? And I think I'll start with the top blue. And I'm taking the photo literally and matching what I think I see. So I don't have to have it looks like that might work out. You can always pick more colors later on, but you don't want to have colors all over the place. So that's why it's sometimes a good idea to pre-select like this. Then as you're working, just a suggestion, you could use another piece of drawing paper, paper towel, tissue paper, whatever it is, but to cover the area where your hand goes. Because what will happen, the oil from your hand is definitely going to get into the paper, and you can also cause smudging. And it's a pretty delicate medium in that it will show up. I also take, after I've pointed my pencil in the pencil sharpener, I bevel the side of the pencil for regular applications. Then you're going to find some dust from the pencil. So you want to clear off that dust on a paper towel. Right here, this is very light, so I'm going to get started just by putting in a light application, going back and forth, and leaving some whites. Now, how do you apply Prismacolor? If it has a very sharp point, you can get into tiny areas. And this is very pointed. But normally you won't use that kind of an application. You want a broader application. And that's why I beveled this blue. And I take my pencil and I'm holding it from an angle. You can see it's a loose, I'm not doing a death grip on this, but I want it loose. And I'm putting it in sometimes just a diagonal form like this. And lighter applications are way better than going too heavy. Start always light to dark. And little pressure. Build up your pressure. And I'll get darker on this, but I think it's much better to lay it out like this. Otherwise, if you go down here real fast, you have nowhere to go. Unless you really have something that is incredibly brilliant blue. But there's no variable in that, and it's very difficult to lift that off. So better to go soft, like I was showing you, and add layers to it. And then you can develop more depth to that and dimension. You can see the pores of the paper showing through this. And that's part of the paper's tooth I was talking about. So there's variations in that. Okay, so that's one way to apply it. Another way to apply pencil is in a circular motion. And this depends on your style, your preference. The area you're working on, if it's just a teeny little area, sometimes this will be much easier. So that's another way to apply it. And then, of course, this is the fine point kind. And if you have an area that is, let's say, a bumpy piece of paper, and you want to fill in the gaps, you can use a circular motion. And this sharp point will really get into the little valleys. And the last way is a sharp pointed pencil. Holding it. Make sure you can see my hand. Holding it flat. And this will get a lot of mileage. So if you had a piece of very smooth paper, you wouldn't see all these valleys. but it would go down really quick. So that's really a good method for sketching. All right, so now to the drawing. Got my cover sheet here. Keep my hand clean and keep things out of the way if you can. And I also keep a piece of scratch paper next to me to test my pencils. So just in case I'm not sure of the color or I want to dust it off, I can always clear out some of the crud on my pencil. Prismacolor is good for small areas for the most part. I'm sure there are people that have done huge paintings with it. You see that beautiful application, how nice it is. It's very rich and it has a softness about it because it's made out of wax. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add some light blue in there, and I need to sharpen that. This is a Dick Blick brand pencil, and it's a little bit harder than the Prismacolor, but it was the color I needed. So you can interchange different brands. So I don't want to get too much darker on that. And now I want to define the orange area on his head. So I'm going to put the blue pencils back in my set and pick out a few browns and oranges. And this pencil needs to be resharpened and then beveled. And I just broke the tip, and I want to dust it off. And just going with a light application. It seems like the circular motion on this is working pretty well. I'm trying to redefine the drawing because I had erased quite a bit of the pencil off, so I want to make sure it's where I want it. It becomes yellower as it goes off to the left. I'm going to take another color, which is like yellow, like a yellow sand. And I'm going over back and forth and layering into the orange. And I can see the graphite through this. And maybe I should have lifted some more off of it. But I could use it, I put shadows in there so it won't show at the final. And I'm adding in another layer. I'm softly layering. I'm not putting heavy layers on top of this. So it's a light layer and another layer on top. Because if you have a heavily waxed area, you will not be able to layer. And next I'm going to bevel this point. This is a color called henna, which is more like a burnt sienna color. With your sets, if you purchased a set of 40 or 30, just use what's closest. You can always buy extra pencils and they don't have to be in a set. Most of the time you don't use the colors that they select anyhow. So now it's developing more depth, and I'm using a circular motion here. And I'm going to take burnt or yellow ochre and glide over this again, because it looks like I'm looking at the photo and the color in that area is really quite saturated. On the areas that intersect between the yellow and the blue, it's not a definite edge. Some of the colors will intersect and overlap a little bit, so it's good to blend in. Just remember not to get too heavy too quick. Keep it light. And looks like this is quite light down in here, and it almost looks like it has a pinkish cast. So I'm going to take a color I think will work, and it is called Deco Pink. You'd never think that this bird would have pink in it, but it does in the shadow, in the lights, not the shadows. Now I'll probably need to lift off some of that graphite and blend in the sides. I like these little pencil erasers that I get on Amazon, and they just sit on the top of your pencil, but they give you a nice detailed area to erase out. It looks like I've got yellow ochre here. And a little bit of dark brown. Now this is a color that I use frequently, and there are a few colors that I've also defined as invaluable colors for me, and one is black cherry, and that's what it is. It's almost like a deep brown mahogany with a little red in it. And you'll pick out your own favorite colors, but I noticed in here I'm using that black cherry in here for some of the definition. So again, it's a warm brown. And that's now starting to develop more depth. Well, that's working along. I'm going to start on the eyeball. And around the eye, it looks like a yellow ochre type of a color. Almost a little bit of orange in it. And I didn't take out an orange this time, but I would add a little here. And I put a little dot there. Seems like all animals have a little bit of a warm color in the corner of their eye. Next, the eyeball itself. The photograph I'm using isn't the clearest, but I can kind of assume there's black in it, but there's also some other colors in it that are making that eye look rich, rather than just putting a flat black. I'm going to try that indigo and a really nice violet. And the violet is called, well, this one is a black cherry. But any purple, I think, will do the same. And indigo is bluish. I want to start with that. I also need to point that. So I'm going around the perimeter of the eye. The top of the eye is darker. Go light to dark, and also find where the lightest light on the eye is. And there's a little bit of a sparkle in the eye at about that point. I'm going to come in now with the black cherry, but this time, again, it's a pointed pencil. You need a point to get into that small area. I lost it at the top, but I'm going to keep the light at the bottom. So I'll keep that light at the top. I mean at the bottom, and eliminate the light at the top. Okay, I think that works. Now say for instance you had that mistake happen, you went over something and you want to recover it. What you can do is take a piece of Scotch tape, just a small piece, put it over the area, and I'm going to do that. Draw right on top of it, and look how much lighter that became. And make sure you don't stick this down heavy onto the paper, because it did lift off a lot of the area around the wax around the eye, so I need to come back and darken that. Also make sure on your paper over here that if you lift, it doesn't tear. So now I've got this collection of pencils in my hand, but I need to darken the eye around first. So go back and redo it. Prismacolor is a slow medium. If you're in a hurry, this is not the material. Okay. Now I'm going to take black, and that's usually the color I leave for the very, very last. And I just keep it as for definition. Now it seems like I've got more orange around that eye. I want to snap that up and make it a little brighter. And the top of the eye is browner outside of the feathers out here. So there's a couple of ways you can work. I prefer to work in one area and work my way down. Some people will work overall in a light tone, covering as they go, and then darkening in increments. I tend to work one area and work across. So this is going to come down to a more finished look here. But think of zones to work in. So right now I'm just going to work in the head zone. Also, I'm painting or drawing the direction that the feathers are growing, so I'm seeing the lines. I'm putting some browns and mixing them into the blue. These feathers don't just stop. Okay. Then I'm going to think about the beak using a fine point. And now I'm going to take, I think, a dark brown or black. And my dark brown is dark umber. I'm going to point that, dust it off. And use the point to get into some of the finer areas. It's a very enjoyable medium. I really like it for small pieces. It's also good for sketching. And if you could find good books on it and read up on it, if you find this an enjoyable material, there are really nice ways to use it and tricks like using solvent. I'm adding more dark around the head and around the eye. I'm darkening and adding some of the detail. It's a real temptation for some people to get overly detailed. So you want to back off of that and make sure you're not drawing every feather. And just indicate, and see, this is the dark brown that I'm still using. Indicate the colors rather than, I'll bring my phone down a little bit closer. See a little bit better. Okay. I'm going to try a little bit more definition around the eye. And this is black. Pardon me, it's indigo, but it's working okay. Mixing in with that brown. And I'll take the indigo and now I'm going to finish this area with a lighter blue. And it looks like it has a little bit of violet in it, a gray violet. There are grays in Prismacolor, and they're divided out by percentages. And I wouldn't worry too much about them. I think just find which works for you. They're really dark ones that could replace black. And I think adding more of that violet on the top of the head and up in here. And darkening. Indigo tends to be on the greenish side, so you may decide that if it's too green, drop in ultramarine on top of it. And the eye, I want to do one thing, and I was telling you about that using Scotch tape. I think I darkened the membrane around the eye a little too much. So I'm going to lighten that up, and I'm going to do that with the Scotch tape method. And that did lighten it, and you could see the wax, or the tape picked up the wax that I had put down. I can also take a little bit off the bottom of the eye. So that looks a little bit better, and there's, I think, more shape to the eye. And this has more brown in it, so you can make your little feathery shapes. And you can take this to whatever degree of detail you wanted to. And I'm going to dull out that little red point in the eye. And the last thing I'm going to do is do the beak. And it does have a pink cast to it. And I have Deco Pink, and I would lighten it up, the graphite, before I do this, or I do it anyhow. Okay. Yeah, because it's going to start smudging. So you may not be able to see this, but I'm adding the pink into the shadow of the pencil. And then the shadow in between the beak, I'm going to start with violet. This is a pale violet. A gray would work to do this as well. And I'm keeping the pencil pretty level to the paper. I'm not pointing up, so I want to just keep it smooth and fast. And lastly, there's a shadow in the middle. And I'm going to try, it's one of the grays I have. It's not quite black, but it's a warm gray. And it's French gray, 90%. And I'm sure there's some science about the grays that I don't know about, but it seems to work just selecting what matches. And there seems a little dark in here. And there's a tiny bit of blue on the tip of the beak. Now the only way you're going to see that beak is by contrast from what's around it. So I'm done with my demonstration, and I would continue the bird using the same method. And then in the background, I would lay the colors in with my pencil on the flat side. So just really quickly I'll show you. Just take it like this and use broad strokes. And that way you'll be able to see the contrast between the background and the beak. And then the colors start blending. That's good. And that contrast in color and value will really make this shine. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the demonstration, and I hope it taught you something. And if you have any questions, let me know. All right, take care.